Hey, am I capturing? Yes. Hey everybody, this is TinTim, that is T-I-N as in no she better don't, T-I-M as in man, what a mighty good man. I am America's terminally insightful drag queen public intellectual, aka the Cornell motherfucking West of Drag, coming to you with my thoughts on RuPaul's Drag Race, Season 6, Episode 6. 2 6s. Add a third one and we're going to hell. Yeah, sorry that this week's video is getting to you so late. I've been super busy, but I think I've also just had, like, not super strong feelings about this episode, so I've been, I haven't been feeling that, like, oh my god, I gotta make this video right now feeling. So I think I'll try to make this pretty quick, just so we can get it in before Monday's two-part, super exciting extravaganza episode. This episode, the rap battle. I thought this was a good episode. I didn't think it was sort of like as exceptional or as exciting as some of the last few for me, and I think that it was more so that it was just like I love the challenge and I love the topic. I love that it was 90s rap. When Adore sort of brought up, like, I want to be Salt and Peppa, not in sync. Like, I was completely there for that, and for, sort of getting that, that sort of aesthetic of that time that was more about the flow and what have you. What was weird to me was that, like, by the time we actually got to see the video, it had all been so smoothed out in the production to become the version that they want to sell on iTunes, that it was actually really hard to see how any of the queens really did, other than Adore, who I think did deserve to win, and it was clear that she kind of killed it. She killed it. They sort of, needed to make the weaker queens listenable in order to sell the track. So all that we got of their sort of failure, if you will, or, sort of was, just what they showed us during the recording of the track, and everyone struggled in the recording because it takes several takes, and, having to put shit together that fast is not easy. So it was another one of those challenges where it felt like they could kind of use it to get rid of whoever they were ready to get rid of now. So in terms of Milk being ejected and Milk being in the bottom, it seemed like a lot of folks felt like that was sort of arbitrary. It could have happened any week. They just decided this was Milk's week and now is the time. And that she wasn't necessarily the worst in this week's challenge. Which maybe, I think there's probably some truth to that. The particular person they seem upset wasn't in the bottom was Darienne Lake, who they felt like did the worst. A lot of people seem to feel like did the worst in the challenge, which I think also may be true. But I guess I'm personally, well, like, for one thing, I don't ever expect the criteria on this show to ever be sort of explicit and clear and equal. Like, that's not the point of the competition. Like, the point of the competition is to create an entertaining TV show. So it's like I'm never, I don't stress that much over the fairness ever of who's picked. But I also think that even if you are thinking about it in terms of fairness, though, like, there's an argument to be made that it's fair to judge people on, like, everything they've put in their entire work, and obviously Darienne has had some very good weeks. So, 6-1, half a dozen, whatever. Milk was clearly one of my favorites in terms of her aesthetic in this season. But I also, even if that aesthetic had been as evolved as it could be, and I don't think she's 100% there yet, or wasn't when they shot the show, even if it had been, like, as strong as it could be, I wouldn't necessarily have expected her to go to the end. That wasn't an expectation that I came in with. It didn't seem like this was set up as her season, But I also, I always expected her to be mid-pack, and I think she put in a respectable showing. I think that they gave credit to the creativity of her aesthetic. I feel like she left with dignity and creativity and sort of on good terms, so I wasn't that upset about it, right? I think one of the things, though, that was making me feel sort of ambivalent about this episode, and one of the reasons maybe I haven't felt like talking about it that much, was just all this shit with Darienne Lake. Want to make sure I'm still recording. It went into like screensaver, and I think it was still recording. I just wanted to make sure it was. And I just like whatever. So Darienne Lake. First of all, the sort of ugliness, the tension, the drama that they sort of cooked up between Darienne and Ben de la Creme was one of those that, while it felt authentic and of the moment while filming the show, it didn't, it didn't, unlike some of last season's drama, it didn't feel sort of like prefabricated or sort of overly manipulated, over the top. It felt real, quote unquote, but not comfortable. It's just sort of ugly and unpleasant. Not super fun to watch. And I think that a lot of us were sort of taken by surprise because we sort of expected Darienne to be, just one of the more, likable, what have you, kind of queens this season. And so we're kind of like, where is this coming from, right? So between the sort of what was coming off as this sort of sour grapes attitude toward Ben, between the fact that a lot of people felt like she should have been in the bottom this week and wasn't, and then the fact that a lot of people were also displeased with Darienne's runway this week because there were a bunch of folks, if you're looking at like the message boards, discussions and shit, who were bothered that she walked down the runway in a dress that was, first of all, not that interesting, but also like an identical silhouette or identical cut, shape, type of dress to at least one, if not a couple others that she's worn. Those three things sort of led to this like perfect storm of people going on this like anti-Darienne tear this week, and that made me uncomfortable. Like I never enjoy seeing like the public go after a really talented queen, and it seemed like there was a lot of that happening this week. I think a lot of us came in with pretty high expectations for her to be one of the better entertainers, performers, funny people. Darienne's audition, Facebook audition video was one of the funniest I've ever seen, and I last spring when they were showing those videos rewatched it multiple times just because it was so entertaining, and I think that was true of other people as well. So yeah, I guess one thing is that I distrust what we're being shown a little bit, that I think that there's probably plenty of times that she's being pleasant and developing strong relationships with the rest of the queens that we probably don't see, because at least starting this week, there was an intention to kind of show Darienne's unpleasantness. But I think the thing that I'm worried for her the most with is, you can have irregular showing in the challenges. You can have mixed runways in terms of how successfully you execute your fashion, so people could be all whatever about her runway this week. But the thing that I worry about for her the most is that when a sizable portion of the fans tag you with that label of like sour grapes or unpleasant or whatever it is, is sort of like having a bad personality. That is one of those things that I think tends to follow the queens post-show, and I would not want that for her. So that made me uncomfortable, and just watching all the discussions about like, oh, Darienne is so sour, Darienne has such a bad personality, like that made me really uncomfortable. The other thing I was thinking about it when we were trying to understand, like, why is she so ugly? Like, why does she have such negative feelings toward Ben? Where is that coming from? What's that about? There was some discussions that some of us had this week kind of like trying to analyze that. And for me, one obvious thing is that, aspects of their aesthetic are similar enough that Ben de la is kind of her most direct competition, maybe, in certain ways, or she might perceive him that way. That De La is, the other funny queen, the other sort of, right? And a type of humor that's most similar to hers. Obviously, Bianca is also funny, but, in terms of aspects of camp, maybe she sees De La as her most direct competition. But I think the other thing, and I thought when I had this thought, and I thought when I had it, maybe I was just kind of like overanalyzing things and whatever, but I've seen other people say the same thing now, So maybe I'm not crazy. And that was last week in episode 5 when Dayla talked about her struggles with weight as a younger person. They did this cutaway to Darienne's face, and she looked sort of like she was not all there for it, like she was not featuring Ben in that moment. And it made me think that maybe there's also some feelings about, you know, I think the justifiable or understandable feelings that folks that truly fall outside of our society's like weight and body sort of norms or standards that really struggle with potential stigma and whatever because of that, I think feel some resentment sometimes toward people who speak out on behalf of those issues, but who in their everyday lives clearly don't face that same kind of discrimination, probably. And, you know, I felt like maybe that dynamic was happening. It was sort of like, fuck you, Dayla, for talking about this issue, because, like, look at you, your body is totally fine, and no one's going to be calling you out on that on the street on an everyday basis, where if people are going to just only see me as fat on a regular basis. You know, it's kind of like that thing that happens anytime that Jennifer Lawrence gets sort of positioned as this spokesperson for body image because of some of the pretty cool things that she said in media about positive body images, but then people sort of jump on that and make her this hero that I don't think she necessarily intended to be. And so I think for people that like actually are dealing with the weight shit in our society, I think then to hear, oh, you know, Jennifer Lawrence is such a great spokesperson for normal bodies, and then to look at her and see this person who maybe in any normal world outside Hollywood would be considered super thin and gorgeous, it's just sort of like, fuck you, right? So I think that maybe there was some of that dynamic, potentially. But I wouldn't want to assume that without, you know, hearing from Darienne herself, because then we're just guilty of assuming that weight and size are a lens through which she is experiencing things when she hasn't said that herself, and that would be just as fucked up as anything else. But I think it's one possible explanation. I don't know. What else did I want to talk about this week? I said I was going to talk about Trinity and HIV stuff. So I think I'll talk about that and then close with that and leave you until next week. So one of the things that I really like about the way that they have dealt with and revealed Trinity's status is that it's just been sort of, that it hasn't been made into like a giant thing or sort of in, you know, that it just sort of came out naturally in conversation, and that they're really, I feel like with it, focusing on destigmatizing the illness and destigmatizing her status, and that's sort of the focus of the way her storyline has been framed. And I see that fitting into what seems like this larger pattern or representational thing, whatever, right now on Logo, especially with all these commercials that really focus on HIV stigma, not just prevention and treatment and all that, of making HIV/AIDS a political issue again and a public and LGBT community issue again, whereas for the last decade at least, I feel like it had become more of just an individual problem, like a biomedical problem that the people who were infected had to deal with on their own. It was no longer seen as a community and public issue that we all have some responsibility for. And, you know, so looking back, right, like at sort of the early HIV/AIDS years, the kind of the ACT UP days, the days when people were still having to do activism and all this, a lot of effort just to get the government, just to get the sort of biomedical establishment to kind of acknowledge the illness and treat it. Obviously, that was a very traumatic and awful time in a lot of ways. All these people were dying. But I think it was also a time when a lot of community came together to organize and to resist and to take care of each other and to make HIV/AIDS, to see HIV/AIDS as like an issue that's affecting the whole community or communities. And the benefit of, I think, claiming the illness or the disease as a community issue is that we put more effort into protecting each other. You develop a more public culture of a safer sex, for instance. I think of things like, you know, buckets of condoms on a bar. You know, maybe you make a space where, it's not even a need to discuss safer sex when you're alone in the room with someone, because it's just taken as the norm in the whole culture and community, because like what else would we do, because it's our responsibility to take care of each other, right? And I think that as the result of all that activism, HIV/AIDS treatment got institutionalized, which is a good thing. It's like what we wanted. There were, things that happened at the same time, like the development of new drugs that made it possible for people to live longer and sort of live with HIV, so there was less of that crisis feeling. There was, more straight people getting it, so it moved beyond just being seen by the dominant culture as an HIV/AIDS issue. It broadened the way it needed to. All of that stuff. The third thing I would say that had a weird impact was just the Bush years and this move toward, like, abstinence-only sex education in our schools. So there was no longer what small gains that had been made in terms of sort of that taking that norm of that community norm of safer sex and applying it more broadly in the whole society and like in our schools. Like I think the era I grew up in the 90s, it may have been just the places I lived too, but I feel like I was exposed to a lot more basic information about HIV/AIDS and protecting myself as a young person than the generation that came after me was. All those things I think added up to have HIV become more of like an individual problem than a public community problem. And the discourse or whatever shifts from let's all take care of each other to something that's more like talk to your partner. And I think talk to your partner can be very dangerous for people. And the reason that I think it's dangerous is when you take all of that burden of protecting each other and you put it in a private space, then there's so much pressure on those two individuals to negotiate that in a context where, most of the violence, at least like the interpersonal violence, the like domestic violence, the intimate partner violence, etc., that happens in this country, world, whatever, happens in behind closed doors in private spaces. And I think that there's a reason for that. It's because those are such loaded spaces. There's such a potential power dynamic and discomfort to put all of the weight and all of the pressure for protection on that space, on talk to your partner, is, to me, is going to result in a lot of people not protecting themselves, because it's a lot of pressure to put on that one space. I think that a public norm around safer sex is always going to be more powerful than an individual conversation about, let's use protection tonight. So, where's I going with all this? And so I think that the media representation of HIV/AIDS shifted a lot after that kind of institutionalization of the illness, combined with some of what I talked about, I think, with like the Bush years. Then what you got was, I grew up in a time when, early 90s, I could turn on the TV and see like a television movie where Molly Ringwald played one of the first really publicly well-known straight women, or one of the first straight women who became a real public figure for combating, or for, dying of, but then becoming a public spokesperson on AIDS. I could watch an AIDS fundraiser hosted by major celebrities. So there was like this constant exposure to it, and this one very, very brief moment in pop culture, I think. And then, once the illness sort of became institutionalized, combined with the thing with the Bush years, then I think that sort of ended. And everything that I know I saw about AIDS in the 2000s, in the first decade of the 2000s, was very much re-stigmatizing and about encouraging stigma. It was, if we saw anything, it was stigma coverage, right? Like some of the storylines that I remember are, all of this crazy over-the-top sort of sex panic about bug chasers, which I know that there are people that do that. I still think that was probably more sensationalized than what it really was in reality. There was shit about like mutant mutant drug-resistant strains of the virus, and like, let's all panic over that. I remember a whole Law & Order episode about like men deliberately infecting each other with mutant strains and shit. There was the whole conversation about black men on the down low. Like, now, black women have been disproportionately infected since the early days of the virus. There was nothing new about that, but there was this kind of sudden attention to it, and then this thing about black men on the down low started to get used as the explanation. These sort of like, you know, morally problematic black men who are lying to their women and hooking up with men on the side and then getting their women infected. And it's been disproven as the cause of the disproportionate infection rate several times over, but as an explanation, had this sort of life in the culture that I think, you know, was negative in so many ways, because it contributed to the idea of the black community as sort of extra homophobic, which gets them sort of stigmatized a lot. It contributed to just a sort of vilification of these men and all of this, right? So, and that didn't help anyone not get infected, and it didn't, you know. So I'm considering all that, I'm just really, I'm pleased in many ways to see destigmatization and the reclamation of HIV/AIDS as a community and public issue start to be the thing again, and it feels like that's some of what's happening. How far that will go, you know, I don't know, but it feels like a movement back toward a little bit more of a community-based, politicized stance toward the illness, which is what I think that we need in this moment to protect people. So. And I have a lot of respect for Trinity for coming on and you know, not letting herself be reduced to that aspect of her experience and identity, but still sharing it very intentionally in a way to contribute to that destigmatization, right? That is all I think I'm going to talk about this week. Much love to you all. Mwah.